Hello and welcome back to the channel. So I did something pretty wild today. I used Bolt v2 to build a complete mobile application with a full backend using Payload CMS. You know that I've always said that I feel that Payload allows you to build full stack apps. Well, this is a perfect example of it. And the wild thing is that it actually worked. Kind of worked, but it worked. Bolt was able to generate the Expo native mobile application. And then I also told it to generate the instructions for setting up Payload CMS. And then I followed those steps. And let me quickly just show you what it built before we dig in deeper. I already have the Payload CMS running in the back, so it allows me to create users, and I'll go into that later, but I already have a user set up. So user example.com, and then the user is password, and then I can sign in. Now this is connected to a Payload CMS backend, and what it stores users and it stores images. And so this is just a simple React Native app that allows you to create accounts, log in, log out, and upload images. So here's a couple of images I uploaded already. I can delete the images. I can upload additional images. Not on my phone, so I'll just choose from my gallery. I can upload the image. There's a little bug that maybe we'll fix if we have time at the end here, so I'm just going to reload Expo. And you can see a couple of things happen. A, it restored the session of the user that was already logged in, so it's managing all that information. And you can see here's the other image that I uploaded. And the last screen is just a profile screen that has the email address of the person that we are working with in our application. So hopefully you found that pretty cool. So please make sure you like, subscribe. And we're going to hop into the code right now. All right, so this is what you're dying to know. You're dying to know the prompt. So let's start with that. All right, we'll just kind of center it over here into the screen and just kind of read through it. So this is literally the prompt that I gave it. Can you build a basic React Native Expo app? Login, sign up, image upload, delete images and list. Owner can see their content. And we want the backend to be in Payload CMS v3. Auth and image storage. Just create, and the important thing is here I say just create a document explaining how to configure Payload CMS, assuming we're started from the create payload app. Now the create payload app is similar for those who are familiar with Next, React. All these frameworks now have a create blah app script, and it just scaffolds out a blank version of the app. And so that's what this does. This create payload app scaffolds out a blank version of Payload. Let me just pause for a minute for folks who don't know Payload. Payload's a CMS that's fully written in TypeScript that basically runs inside of Next.js. I don't use it as your traditional CMS. If you take a look at some other videos that I have done, I basically use it as a backend stack because it gives me authentication, it gives me image uploads, it gives me role-based access, and it basically gives me potentially an object model that I can work with without bringing in Drizzle or Prisma or anything like that. And the kicker is that it already has an admin UI built in out of the box. So I don't have to write an admin UI on top of my backend or my database. I get all that with Payload. And we'll see more of that later. But this is just the script that I gave it, and then I said, let's go. And it cranked and it cranked and it cranked. Another thing, I put it in plan mode on that original request. So it cranked and it cranked and it cranked, and then it came here and it said, now I have a clear understanding. It was interesting because I didn't know Bolt would do this. It looked like Bolt automatically stuck a database on here, even though I stated clearly that I did not want one, that I wanted it just to use Payload CMS. But it said because I requested Payload CMS for the backend, that it's going to get some more information and then it will just delete the Bolt database. So here, it says it's clarifying questions. Basically, it's confused because it says, why am I asking for Payload? Do I want to use Payload? Where am I going to host it? So these are important questions for folks who aren't familiar with it. I kind of knew what I was doing. So I said, yes, yes, yes. I'm okay with all this. And here, they're trying to encourage me to continue to use the Bolt database. I don't want to use the Bolt database. So I just come here and say, did not ask for a Bolt database, remove it. So it says it understands, it's going to remove it, use Payload exclusively for the backend, and then it's going to generate a comprehensive plan to kind of help me understand how to set up Payload CMS. It's got some more copy here. I'll give you full access. I got to figure out how to copy this whole script here. I'll put it into a file and I will check it in to a repo along with this whole application for the front end and the back end, so you can kind of see what we created. But it's going through the steps here. It's going to do all the stuff that Payload needs to do, creates the users, the schemas. It sets up the JWT authentication, sets up the images collections. It's going to put it all inside of this Payload CMS setup file. Then you can see it goes into React Native app and it cleaned up everything so that's not dependent on Supabase. It creates authentication module. Payload has that out of the box. It creates the upload functionality. You get that out of the box. It's now talking about how it's going to lay out our mobile application, image deletion, content security on access controls, and then just the basic navigation of the app. And then it generates a bunch of different documentation to help us out. It summarizes it, and then the way we're going to communicate is basically through a REST API. Another thing about Payload CMS is that out of the box it generates a REST-based API for all the objects that you set up. They basically call them collections. And so this is the key one. My final deliverable includes a fully functional mobile app and documentation to set up Payload. The key part is, can it get the documentation right? I know it can build a mobile app. My question was, can it explain to me fully how to set up Payload and have it connect? So I clicked proceed and it starts to build. And then it starts to just crank out the information about the plan. Then it just summarizes, once again, explaining what we're going to do. I say, perfect, start building. It went through, built everything, explained what it built. The important thing here is this Payload CMS setup file, because that explains what we want to do. Now, because I know Payload, I could immediately look at the setup file and I realized that it did not use the proper version of Payload. Even though I said to use v3 up at the top, it still generated a set of instructions that were based on the older version of Payload. And so here, you're absolutely right. Let me review the current Payload CMS documentation and update both. So, because you see now it's going out and searching the web. So it does the research, it finds the errors, creates a new plan. And so I wanted to know specifically about configuration, like how am I going to be able to run this app on my phone or on my phone and have it still connect to the backend Payload system running on my local device. So I asked it about that problem, and it updated the README and it wrote this local IP script. By the way, the local IP script did not work. It generated the incorrect IP address, but I'll show you how I addressed the problem to get around that. I don't want to do a lot of talking because I know most of you are here for the code, but I just wanted you to see the process that I followed and how well Bolt did with it, because you could see I didn't have to do a lot of additional prompting and correcting. So here it tells me how to get started. Like I said, I'm going to skip this local IP thing because it didn't work. But the important thing, it tells me that I need to basically set the Expo Payload API URL to match the URL from Payload CMS. So maybe now is a good time to hop over to Payload CMS so we can talk about how well these instructions did. All right, so we're at the admin panel. I have a bunch of videos on Payload, and I'll also include some documentation. I'm going to make an assumption that you have a general idea of what Payload is, and you can kind of research the rest. But right here is another window where I have the user that we saw in the app logged in. So you can see here, you notice I don't see the other user. I only see who I'm logged in as, which is userexample.com. It's right here. Once again, all of this UI you're looking at came for free from Payload. And then if you go to the images collection, you can see here the 2 images that I've uploaded. And once again, you can see that there's an API that supports this URL with this ID will give me access to this, but it is controlled so that only this user can have access to these images. And so that's a quick overview of Payload. Now let's go through just quickly the quality of the instructions that were provided. And if you go down to this Payload CMS setup, remember I told it that I was already going to run this create Payload app, and so it only needed to give me instructions on what to do after I ran this. So that's what it did. It laid out to me what environment variables I needed to add to my environment file. Then it told me specifically to open or create. You already have this payload configuration file, so this payload configuration file existed already. I just needed to go in, where is it? Source, payload config. There are some key things that I needed to update inside of here. One, I needed to add the collection files that we're working with, and I'll go over those files later. Two, I needed to set the cores down here. So the important part was to make sure that we allowed requests from the IP address of this device. And so that's the IP address of this device is here. The way I actually got it was I just took a look at when I launched Payload CMS. This is the address of the backend, so that's where I copied the IP address from. That was a change that I made because you can see here, it's just got these localhost ones up at the top. And so I needed to add these in here. And then for CSRF, I just copied in the default that they already provided. The next thing is I needed to set up this users collection. By default with Payload, you get a users collection, but it doesn't have any of these access rules in it. It controls based on who you are or any information that you can get that gets passed into these access functions. You can control who can create, read, update, or delete. So this is one of the first problems. Bolt did not create any access controls on this user collection. When I tried to sign up, I could not sign up because there was no create access set. And so like it says here, that allows public user registration. Since this was not set, I could not sign in. So that was a bug. That was one of the bugs that Bolt was not able to solve. Luckily, because I know Payload, I was able to look at it and kind of tell Bolt, hey, you don't have access controls on this collection, please fix it. And then it went in and it updated and added all of them. So what this says is basically anybody can create a user object. This says that only users can read their own data. So what it does is it checks, do I have a user? And then does the ID of the document match the current user's ID? Does the same check for updating, and does the same check for deleting. And so that's all I needed to do to get my users collection working. All of the other functionality, sign in, sign up, read, write, update, comes to you out of the box from Payload. It's very awesome. All right, so that was step 5. Let's hop down here to... So this is just explaining by setting auth true on this collection, it basically handles all of the authentication stuff. The login, logout, endpoints, password, token refresh, all of that whole API is created for you. And then now we create the images collection. That's where we're storing the uploaded files. If we go up to the top here, same set of, not the same set, but basically you need the access controls to control who can do what. Same thing, user can only read their own images. You have to basically have to be authenticated to upload images. Users can only update their own images. Users can only delete their own images. And then what you do is you define the fields. Payload takes this field definition and creates a database structure and all the relationships and everything that have to go along for you just by using code to configure your collection and the collection's relationships. So there's a field called owner that has a relationship to the user table. It controls the relationship between the photo and who actually owns it. Here's the alt text for the, I don't want to say photo. Here's the alt text for the image. And then Payload also has hooks, so things you can do before, after, kind of there's a whole series of hooks right here. You can see that we only care about before change. And so basically what we're saying is that before you change, automatically set the owner to whoever the current user is, since the current user owns the object. So if I'm uploading, I'm the current user, so make me the owner. And then this upload property here, it customizes how you handle the files that get uploaded. So it's just saying, this is where I want you to store the file. These are the files that I can upload. And then it will automatically generate these image sizes for you. So you can predefine how you want the images manipulated as they're getting updated. And Payload handles all that for you. So we've covered that. And we already addressed this, which was updating Payload with the collections, which is done here. How to create the upload directory for the files are. Update might get ignore. And that was it. The instructions, like I said, other than the one error, which I had to prompt Bolt to fix, they were pretty spot on. And the server came up and it ran fine. And I can show you if we go back here. So here I said your documentation on creating the user through REST API failed because we did not set access rules on the user collection. And it says a good catch. It recognizes it. It goes through and it fixes it, explains what the problem is, explains what the new code is, and then goes to update the document. And then what was this? Error, concise fix needed. Oh yeah, it did not properly install the plugin for the camera. It needed to install Expo Image Picker. It didn't install it properly, and it didn't give me the appropriate instructions to install it. Once again, it was something that I was able to figure out. I saw the error message. It said it couldn't find that library. I opened up package.json. I saw the library was here, so then I said, oh, it just didn't install it. So I did an npm install and installed it and got us moving. Like even here, it gave me these instructions, but nowhere did it say to run npm install, which is kind of bizarre. And then here, when I first tried to log in, it wasn't logging in appropriately. So I asked it to kind of, generate some API logs so I can see in the console when the user is logging in. Yeah, I wanted it to dump out some information so I could try to debug it. It dumped it out, and I think there was an error with the port, and then everything worked. I mean, that was literally it. The app just worked, and I was pretty amazed. And I think, and I hope that you're kind of amazed by this also. Let's just take a quick look at some of the mobile code. I didn't really poke around in here because it just worked. I didn't need to. But I don't know how much value this is, because if you don't really know React Native or Expo, this isn't going to matter much to you. But we can kind of touch on some key things. So like in the login. All right, so it calls this login function. The login function is coming from this useauth hook. So if I poke around, useauth comes from context auth context. Context auth context. So we look at login. We're passing in the login credentials. Nice to see it's using TypeScript. Would have been nice if it JS docked this, but it didn't. And then it calls our auth service, and let's go to our auth service. And then we're in our auth service, and it created this. I've seen this pattern before. It's created this API client. So let's take a look and see what the API client doing. And here is kind of where it simplifies the process of communicating with Payload on the back end. And I guess I'll go a little bit deeper on login. So on mobile, where you're not using cookies, authentication is being handled through the token storage. And so what they're doing here in this interceptor, it's checking to see if you have a token, which I need to set in my authorization header to successfully make the API calls. This interceptor should also be, I didn't test it. Yes, this interceptor also, if it gets a failed error and it's because it needs to refresh the token, this interceptor will attempt to call this API point that was generated for us also in the backend and payload to refresh the token and just keep the app moving. So this was a nice touch that it did for you. It'll automatically refresh the token for you if possible and just keep the app running smoothly. But like I said, this API TS is a wrapper around the REST API to call payload. So if we go back to our auth service and we look at our login, we can see here this endpoint user/login. This API call is being made to our payload backend. It will get our response. And then at our response, we're pulling out our token, we're pulling out our refresh token, and then we're sending all the user data to the front end. It's the same thing, wash, rinse, repeat. Same thing with the sign up. It's calling this sign up endpoint. It's going to do a post. You're passing in the information that it needs, the credentials that it needs to sign up. Result of a sign up, you get back your access token, your refresh token, and you're good to go. Image services, let's just quickly touch on this. Image service is called. We need to pass a file in. Once again, this is our API client, so it's calling the /images with a post to our Payload CMS REST API. It's passing the URI, the name of the file, and the type of the file. and then it gets saved, and you get this response object back, and the response object back contains the document of the representation of the image and payload. I could kind of dig in deeper in this, but I really just wanted to cover the high level, and I didn't want this video to get too long because it's just a lot of talking. So let's just kind of wrap this. Okay, so let's talk about lessons learned. Bolt v2 is pretty impressive. The fact that it was able to generate the React Native application off that prompt with only a few errors, plus figure out how to connect the application to Payload CMS and provide clear instructions on how to set up the Payload CMS backend is impressive, and I got to definitely give it a thumbs up for that. The errors were trivial. And I say they're trivial because I understood both of the platforms. I understand Payload CMS and I understand React and Expo. I still do feel, though, that if you at least could find your way to the documentation and you were able to provide additional context to Bolt in the prompts, that the errors that it had, it could have solved them and you would have been successful. So I give it a thumbs up for that also. Third, Payload is a winner. I love Payload. I always say that it's not just for websites. It's a back-end stack for enterprise applications. There's times that in the past I might have reached for Firebase for kind of the ease of use, and there's other times that I might have reached for Superbase, so I want more, and I think that Payload for me kind of sits right in the middle, and because it does all the things that I needed to do, and the big win for me is that it gives me a nice admin console to support the application. When I have to give it to my clients, I can pretty much give it to my clients as is, and they can do the work they need to do, as opposed to Firebase or Superbase. I have to write some backend on top of all this stuff. Finally, would I use it on a production application? I most certainly would use these tools together to go, and I'll say beyond scaffolding. Some people say, oh, just scaffold your app. I think you can get pretty deep into the application. If you understand the full tech stack like I do, you can get pretty deep into the application and do a lot of the basic blocking and tackling of building solutions and have AI generate it for you and you just tweak it. So definitely, I think it can fit into your development process and add value for you when you're building a product. Once again, thanks for coming through. There'll be a link for the full source code of the Bolt project. I'm going to include the whole prompt, and then I'll also provide the source code for the Payload CMS. Thanks. See you next time. Bye.